Today we find ourselves stateside during the World War II era in 1940s Illinois, more specifically, the small isolated town of Mattoon, a flatland settlement founded and built on a prairie nearly 100 years earlier in the 1830s, a small, quaint settlement, an unexpected setting for an otherworldly series of events that would befall a small town. Still unsolved nearly 90 years later, a tale of mystery, conspiracy, and hysteria. Today we learn the story of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. In a time while families desperately struggled with the fact that many of their sons had never returned, or were still overseas in the middle of the Great War, all those that had remained stateside continued to the best of their abilities, carrying on normal lives and operations. And the small town of Mattoon, Illinois was no different. In the early 1940s, oil reserves were found in the hills surrounding the town, creating a small oil boom. All seemed as well as it could be considering wartime, so no one could have truly expected the mystery that would unfold. On the night of August 31st, 1944, a man named Raef was awakened during the early hours by a strange odor. He felt nauseated and weak from the odor, and suffered from a fit of vomiting. Suspecting that he was suffering from gas poisoning, Raef's wife, who was lying beside him, insisted that he check the kitchen stove to see if there was a problem with the pilot light. When she attempted to get up, she found that she was partially paralyzed and unable to move or to leave her bed. Mr. Raef's house was located on Grant Avenue, and on that same night, a young mother living close by was awakened by the sound of her infant daughter violently coughing. Alarmed and nauseated herself, she attempted to stand, but incredibly found herself unable to leave her bed. In what she described, "I was paralyzed and confused." The two residents of the small town were shocked at the sudden sickness and mysterious odor and reported the incident, but ultimately passed it off as a one-off event or an accidental incident. That was until, on the following night of September 1st, 1944, a third reported incident took place. A woman named Aline Kearney, who lived just a couple streets away from the Raef's residence, reported a strong, sweet odor in and around her house around 11 p.m. At first she dismissed the smell, believing it to be blooming flowers outside of her window, but the odor soon became stronger and more pungent. As she breathed in the fumes, she began to lose feeling in her legs and felt a burning sensation on her lips and her throat. Kearney, panicking, called out to her sister, who was in the house at the time. Her sister also noticed the noxious odor and determined that it was coming from the direction of a bedroom window, which was open. The sister immediately shut the window, and slowly Mrs. Kearney was able to recover. The police were contacted, but no evidence of a prowler was found. At around 12:30 a.m., after all had settled at the Kearney residence, Burch Kearney, Aline Kearney's husband, had returned home from work, unaware of the situation that had taken place an hour earlier at his home. Once arriving, he finds an unidentified, mysterious man hiding in the brush close to one of the house's windows. Mr. Kearney, shocked, briefly watched the odd man before yelling out to him. The strange man, startled, fled away while Kearney gave chase to him on foot, but was unable to catch him. Kearney would go on to describe the prowler as, "He was a tall man, he was dressed in all dark clothing, and he was wearing a tight-fitting cap." This description would be widely reported in the local media and became the common visual description associated with this gasser. In the days following the Kearney attack, there were nearly half a dozen similar-like incidents. Although no clues were ever found at the scene, the actual first piece of physical evidence was found on the night of September 5th, 1944, when Carl and Beulah Courdes returned to their home around 10 p.m. After spending a few minutes in their house, they noticed an odd smell and a piece of white cloth, slightly larger than a man's handkerchief, sitting on the porch next to their screen door. Beulah Courdes picked up the mysterious cloth and smelled it, but as soon as she inhaled, she fell violently ill. She described the effect of being similar to that of an electric shock. Her face quickly began to swell. She experienced a burning sensation in her mouth and her throat and began to violently vomit. As with other victims, she also reported feeling nauseous and experiencing partial paralysis of her legs. Carl and Beulah Courdes later theorized The cloth must have been left on the porch in order to attempt to incapacitate the family dog, which usually slept there most nights. In addition to the cloth, a skeleton key, described as looking well used, was reportedly found on the sidewalk adjacent to the porch. The most mysterious item found was a large, almost empty, tube of woman's lipstick. The Courdes would have the cloth analyzed by the authorities, but later would be determined that no chemicals could be found or could explain Beulah Courdes' violent reaction. On that same night, a second incident was later reported, this time on North 13th Street, only a couple blocks away from the Courdes, at the home of Mrs. Leonard Burrell. Mrs. Burrell reported seeing a slim stranger, dressed in all black, break in through her bedroom window, where they then attempted to gas her, using, as she described, some metal apparatus. As public concern over the alleged gassings quickly rose, and local police became flooded with reports, the story and fear would grow to the point that J. Edgar Hoover's FBI would eventually become involved, with the local police issuing a statement calling on residents to avoid lingering in residential areas, and warning that rogue groups or militias of citizens set up to patrol for the gasser should be disbanded for reasons of public safety. Police would even go as far as checking and confirming with all the prisons and mental wards in the state as to any potential escapees or people of interest. All to no avail. They still had no idea who could be responsible for the gassings. In the following week, dozens of reports continued to come in. There was also an increase in physical evidence being reported. Residents of Mattoon all were on high alert. The evidence was ranging from mysterious footprints allegedly being discovered underneath the windows of homes, to tears and cuts being found in window screens. Paranoia consumed and gripped the small town. In the time span of 2 weeks, nearly 20 isolated reports of gassing attacks had now taken place. The last, and one of the more odd incidents that were reported, was on the night of September 13th, 1944, when a woman named Bertha Burch described that as she lay in bed and attempted to fall asleep, and as her eyes slowly began to grow heavy, she had glanced over out of her window. To her dismay and her horror, she saw an empty, pale face looking directly back at her. She froze, shocked and perplexed. She attempted to move, but was stuck in place. She laid motionless, in bed, inhaling these noxious fumes. She quickly then began to grow ill and would lose consciousness. Once regaining her senses, Mrs. Burch then reported the authorities that the face that she had seen in the window was that of a woman. She was confident in her opinion and insisted to the police that the gasser was a woman in men's clothing. Although skeptical, incredibly, police would find the prints of a woman's high-heeled shoes outside of Mrs. Burch's bedroom window the very next morning upon inspection, only adding to the ever-growing mystery. Local police and FBI investigators would continue, ultimately leading to no arrests or prosecutions for the gassings. The police chief would eventually go on to say that the gas attacks were most likely caused by chemicals carried by the wind from a nearby industrial plant, and that there was no actual Mad Gasser at all. Many people had agreed, and even till now have concluded the incident that occurred in Mattoon, Illinois, back in 1944, was simply just a case of mass hysteria, with the tale of a Mad Gasser spreading across the town without there ever actually being a physical gasser responsible. But for those that had been affected by the bizarre gassings, the existence of a Mad Gasser was no question. They had lived through the experience and wouldn't forget it. Many, in doubt of the official police narrative, had suspected something much more sinister. They asked themselves, who could even be responsible for such a bizarre and large-scale attack, and why would the police and FBI attempt to cover up the truth? Many had suspected that the string of gassing attacks must have been deliberate and orchestrated plot against them, most likely done by the government. Guinea pigs in some sort of test that they had never agreed to. Many victims had reported that during the gassing attacks, while they were incapacitated, unable to move, that the gasser would continue to watch them through the window as they struggled, observing their movements, reactions, as if they were studying the effects of the gas. Many civilians couldn't believe that the federal government would do something of that nature, especially against its own citizens. But as time goes on, we learn the truth is typically much darker than we'd like to believe. Many would go on to point out the Tuskegee Experiment. Conducted between 1932 and 1972, the CDC and the U.S. Public Health Services would purposely infect, officially, over 400 black men with the syphilis virus, with the men being completely unaware. The goal of the experiment was to track the progress of the disease in an untreated body, all the way to death, with over 100 patients eventually dying of the virus, and with over 20 wives and children of patients ultimately being infected with syphilis. The government hoped to keep the experiment a secret, but ultimately would be leaked in the early 70s.
What was done cannot be undone, but we can end the silence. We can stop turning our heads away. We can look at you in the eye and finally say, on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry.
Again, many point to the peculiar nature of the Mattoon incidents, from the effects to the details, and concluded it must have been some sort of experiment, most likely of some new military-grade gas, and its effects on the public. But even now, nearly 90 years later, we're left to wonder. And guys, that about wraps up this case, the story of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. I've been on my mass hysteria tangent lately, so the couple of glass cases I've looked into are mass hysteria stories, and I kind of like them. I like discerning the fact from fiction. This one has a little more validity, I think, just because of the over 20 eyewitnesses accounting to seeing the same type of person lurking outside their house and their windows. This one's pretty interesting. In my personal opinion, I don't really put my opinion into the stories, but in my personal opinion, I feel like this was a government experiment. They were probably testing some new gas agent towards the end of the war and see how it would react onto an unsuspecting public. It makes sense. But guys, thank you again. If you listened all the way to the end, whether it's video or audio format, please consider following the channel, subscribing or liking or whatever it may be. Again, much appreciated. Thank you, and take care.